I'd say, like, in that moment, that's when it hit me. Like, dude, no more games. Like, this is real.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And that's why we're going to talk with my friend Gary. Gary's had a career path that has moved around. He started off as an escape, and then throughout the course of his life, he made another escape. And not only did it change his career, but it changed the way his life unfolded. It changed the way his family unfolded with him and the various places that they went to because of his career. And it's a funny thing because sometimes the career ends up driving the journey of your life for some people. And it can be a wonderful thing, it can be a different thing, a difficult thing, all at the same time. And especially when you have a family in the mix. So we're so excited to listen to his story. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Gary Lundberg, welcome in.
Hi, Chris. Great to see you again.
So glad you're here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Gary. I am a spry 57, soon to be 58, and I am married for almost 25 years now. My wife and I are going to go to Ireland for our 25th anniversary coming up in August, and so we have two kids. Both are in college now, which is shocking. Last time you and I worked together, they were, I don't know, 4 and 6 or something along those lines. And now they're both in college. And I live in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, which is basically a suburb of Denver. And I work as a product manager / marketing program manager for a little company named after a big river.
Roger.
You may have seen our vans in your neighborhood.
It's a small boutique little shop.
Yeah, it's the Mississippi Spatula Emporium.
Right.
No, actually, it's Amazon. So
sure.
Anyway,
that's fantastic. Now, were you born in Colorado?
I was not, but we moved here when I was fairly young, when I was in like 6th grade. And so I spent a lot of my formative years here, rounded out elementary school. And then back in the day, we called it junior high. So I spent junior high, high school, and college here in Colorado, down in Colorado Springs. And then college here up in Golden, which is in the western suburbs of Denver. And then, after I got out of college, I moved on and then spent a couple of decades bouncing around the country. And then about 12 years ago, moved back.
Nice. You know, it's a funny thing where some people don't go home. Some people go home and they tool around and they come back. Is there, just curious, Gary, is there something about Colorado that you particularly love, or did you just find yourself there?
You know, it's a bit of an interesting story. I think I might find it interesting. When you're 22 years old and you've just gotten out of college, I remember I was fortunate enough to have two job offers out of college. One happened to be local in Denver area, and the other was in Houston. And I remember relating this to my parents, and my mom, dearly departed, loved her to death. She said, "Oh, well, if you take the job in Denver, you can come home every weekend." And so I went to Houston.
Exactly.
So I just had that, little bit of traveling bug about just wanting to break out and experience new things. And by happenstance, I did go to Houston, and that was my first job, working on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. My original early degree was in petroleum engineering. And
Wow.
so, yeah, well, I know we'll get into
Were
the
you on the
numerous
rigs?
hats.
Like were you on the rig itself?
I was on rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, and uh, had some really interesting experiences out there. Some of the best food is on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, because where it's located, there's a lot of Louisiana influence. And if you're on an oil rig, you get a per diem, you get a bonus, for every day you're on the rig. So not only were these chefs, yes, they were chefs in a galley on a rig, and they were making more money working on oil rigs than they could back on the mainland, in a restaurant in Baton Rouge, in any other place.
So
So
when you were on the oil rig, could you see land?
no, we were hundreds of miles offshore. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So it was a little harrowing at times. I One of the craziest stories I had. I only had the job, or I only stayed with the job. Let me put it that way, for 6 months, because of what you're, what I think you're alluding to, like working on oil rig. That's crazy. And so, we got chased off an oil rig by a hurricane that was
Oh,
bearing down in the Gulf. And we were one of the last crews to evacuate this rig. In fact, we were the last crew. That was it. And the seas were so rough that this is hard to process, but we couldn't evacuate by boat. So what do you do in a hurricane when you can't evacuate by boat? Oh, let's take the helicopter. So,
no.
and there's not a helicopter on the rig. So the helicopter came from the mainland to pick us up from the rig. And I'm at this point, I'm 22 years old, first
Right.
job, and we're on the helipad platform of this rig, and the foreman of the rig, or supervisor, whatever you want to call him, is barking at us orders like, "Okay, when the helicopter lands, I want you people over here and you people over there, and here's how to work the fire extinguishers." And we're like, "What? Wait, what? Fire extinguisher? What are you talking about? Why do I need to know how to work a fire extinguisher?" And so we saw the helicopter appear, and it looked like a gnat in a fan. It was just bouncing all over the place, and we are like, "Oh my god, we're gonna get on this thing, or it's somehow gonna land here, and it's not gonna explode in a fireball." I don't know, but it landed. We all climbed on, and we all got the heck out of there. And I think it was about that time I decided, maybe I should spruce up my resume and see if there's something else.
See if there's something outside the oil rig. I think though that's such a great adventure to have at 22, right? I mean, why not? And when you were like listening to your mom and your mom was like, "Awesome, we'll see you every weekend, dear." You were like, "No, you won't, because I'm off to Houston." I think
Yeah, I think.
I think that is a natural thing for young men to do. I think that there is I think maybe not for everybody, but I don't know. The sense I get is that for most young men, it's so important to leave and to get out and to try to carve some kind of identity that's your own away from the house.
Yeah, I'd say I had a very strong inclination to get out of the house and to get out of my burg, and that I'd grown up with, been there for 10 years, junior high through college, and I just wanted to get away, just to see what else there was. Still pretty young. I mean, 22. I still didn't know. Yeah, Colorado. It wasn't like there was something driving me out of Colorado, except maybe perhaps the parental pressure to come home every weekend if I had gotten a job here locally.
Sure.
But other than that, I was just like, yeah, I just had a little itch I wanted to scratch and go off and experience new places, new things, new people, and
And
that's
that
what I've
makes
done.
sense, right? Because, I mean, folklore is replete with stories of the young man going out into the wilderness, right? Traveling, getting out, going on a ship, you know, getting in an apprenticeship, going to another village, putting the rucksack on and getting out of town. I, we have so few rites of passage as young men, right? There's maybe some high school graduation, and maybe some folks might have a bar mitzvah, which is a rite of passage of sorts. But not everybody then, when they leave high school, either goes to college, they might go to trades, they might just do something, they might work. So I think sometimes when we're younger, we have to create a rite of passage for ourselves.
I think that there's a component of what you just said and what inspired me to go off. I look at my parents and even my sister. I have an older sister, and she has stayed basically in Colorado Springs since we moved there. And I've been the nomadic younger brother, whatever, that could never settle. I was always bouncing around, going from one city to another, having a lot of different jobs, going to schools in different countries. And I love my sister to death, but we are entirely different people now than we were when we were growing up together. We still bond, have family events, but where I'm going with this is just I look back now. I'm coming up on my 40th high school reunion,
Right.
and so I have been tapped to be an MC of sorts for this event, and I've been to a few of my high school reunions, my 10-year, I think my 20-year, and anyway, various gatherings, and I've begun to realize that the folks that remain planted and just grow up in this bubble that they never really, I mean, they might vacation and go places, but they always come back. But to live in different places and to experience different cultures and different people and different ways of living and outlooks, I feel has made me a more rounded person. That can be good or bad, however you want to interpret that
Mm-hmm.
phrase. Um, but I feel like now, because I've had these other perspectives of living in Canada and Australia, and living in Kansas and San Diego and the Bay Area and Denver, and spending a lot of time in Seattle, that I I'm not bragging, but I just feel like I have a little bit more perspective than some of the friends that I grew up with that have stayed and remained in one place like their whole lives.
Yeah. Well, I think that, different places have a different culture. They've got a different sensibility. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it was, looking back on it now, a beautiful and maybe the best place to grow up. It was a city of neighborhoods, and it was very formative in terms of the person of that I became. Right. So in Pittsburgh, um, the industry was steel back in the 1800s, really, and there were these, you know, large families that controlled most of the major industries. Carnegie, for example. But what Carnegie did, besides having all these steel plants, was invest in the city. The Carnegie Art Museum, the Carnegie Foundation, the Carnegie Institute, right? Carnegie Mellon, right? All these major schools and the like. So it was this funny little place that Pittsburgh was, where there was this deep blue collar, really workmanlike Eastern European roots. Yet at the same time, these magnates came in to create cultural institutions within the city. So it drew people into the universities and it drew academics. So we had this really interesting mix of um, people, right? And I was telling my one friend, Jeff, in another episode that, in Pittsburgh, you can't really big time anybody. You just can't, right? Because even if you're like at the top of the mountain in Pittsburgh, bro, you're still in Pittsburgh, right? You're not like it's not like you're in Manhattan, right? Right. And so you're still
Right.
in Pittsburgh. So there's no big timing and the people get along and the neighborhoods are close together. And so I didn't understand it at the time, of course, but now that I'm old and I look back, I am who I am because I grew up there. And I think that for you, when you experience these different cities, you get an understanding of different people because the people that are in these cities are going to be different folks, right? The sensibilities of someone in outside of Kansas City is going to be totally different than the sensibilities of someone in San Francisco.
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of comes full circle back to your question, which I don't think I really answered, which is like, how did I end up back in Denver? And it took that perspective and appreciating those sensibilities. And I think learning how those perspectives are formed and developing those sorts of sensitivities has really helped me become, I think a person that I can respect and appreciate how somebody got to where they are,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's somebody that you really respect or and you want to you want to emulate, or somebody that you step over on getting off the train when you go to downtown Denver. Like
Sure.
there's an empathy that I think has developed in me from having those experiences,
I,
and
I,
some may think it's a weakness, but I I think it's a strength.
yeah, I was going to ask you that. Do you think living in multiple places and having these different relationships with these different jobs has made you more tolerant?
I Yes, emphatically, yes. And it's an opinion that I have of myself that I perhaps wouldn't know or begin to think like I'm a more tolerant person unless I compare to others. And I go back to my bubble comparison of those that I know that have just remained in Colorado Springs, uh, which anyway, Colorado Springs is Colorado Springs. And so I think, wow, they see me potentially as like a big softy because I can
Wow.
understand how these people grew to
Wow.
how they got into, but then I see, I'm not trying to judge. I'm just thinking like I feel like there's I have a bit more empathy than the hardline folks that stayed in Colorado Springs and didn't really experience those other lives outside that world. I'm
You
certainly
know,
not perfect.
no, but what's interesting what you said is nobody's perfect, thank goodness. But it's so funny that you use the word softy because men have a really you know very specific biased connotation with the word softy,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Right?
I
Like
was
you're a big softy, like you're too sensitive, like you're too kind, like you're a pushover. But in actuality, you're more tolerant, you're more accepting. You hope to maybe seek a little bit of a better understanding of where someone comes from. And I don't know why why does that have to be quote unquote soft? And not only that, but I don't know why that's a negative thing. I think that actually that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't have allowed myself to become like this if I didn't think it was a good thing. I also think that with that understanding become or translates into potentially the ability to affect and change and make a difference. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're critical and judgmental and just want these social problems to just go away and not be on your front porch or at the train station, um, you know, if you draw that hard line and just say, I just want it to go away, that's it's not going to go away. You
Right.
either I'm stopping short of saying if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. But I think there is an element of truth to that in some of our the challenges that we face as a society and individuals face that we see every day. And you can choose to think that somebody else is going to deal with that and somebody else is going to help the problem, help that individual, help them overcome, help them um, be whatever you want them to be that doesn't bother you. Um, or you can ignore it and it's still going to, it's more of a reflection, I think, on the individual being irritated by, I see
Mm-hmm.
people get irritated by perhaps the unhoused community. And I think like that's a reflection on if you're judging the unhoused, it has no effect on them. Like your judging of them isn't helping them, but it's a reflection of you that I don't think anybody really wants unhoused people in their community, but if
We also
you can
don't want
either
them to be unhoused, right? We want to find a way
correct,
to help that problem. It's a funny
correct.
thing. It's the Walt Whitman to Ted Lasso to the world of be curious, not judgmental, right? And I think that I don't know, getting around and you can be open to other people and open to other situations, but it seems to me like as you started to do your, I'm not going to call it wandering, but why not? Why not call it wandering, right? When you wander from these different places, it seems like you pick something up from each of the places that you were, right? I picked up stuff. Clearly, I took stuff with me from Pittsburgh. I picked stuff up in St. Louis. I clearly picked stuff up and have immersed myself in San Diego and in Southern California. But you seem to be somebody who was able to pick something up from a variety of places. And the one thing I find very interesting about you, Gary, and I didn't think about it now until now, is you don't actually have an accent.
Uh, Tell that to my friends in Canada. It was really funny. When I first showed up to grad school in Canada, I'll share with your listeners, I quit my job when I was 28 after working for 6 years in the oil industry and deciding that I wanted to go and get an MBA and see what else that could uh, what doors that could open. Anyway, I was at a little mixer prior to like the first day of class, meet your classmates kind of environment. I'm an American going to school in Canada, which is already probably not terribly common. Um, but I loved the campus. I went to school in Vancouver at UBC, and I was just rubbing shoulders with my soon-to-be classmates. Hey, how's it going? Hey, pleased to meet you. Hi, I'm Gary. Hey, what? And I know I didn't didn't speak for more than like 5 minutes, and somebody said, "Oh, what part of the states are you from?" And I, and at that time, I thought like Canadians and Americans, we all speak the same. Sometimes, I'd watched enough SCTV to know that maybe they say certain other things a little differently, but I was so ignorant and naive to think like, oh yeah, they sound just like me. But then as soon as I opened my mouth, they're like, "What part of the
Like,
states are you
don't
from?"
have that. That's hilarious. The reason that I say that is, if anyone's ever been to Pittsburgh or Southwest Pennsylvania or that area, there's a definite Pittsburgh accent. It's some of the O's and some of the I's, and and it kind of rolls through. Um, people might have heard it when they heard Bill Cowher, the old Pittsburgh Steeler coach, talk, because he had a little bit of a Pittsburgh accent. I don't. I don't know why I don't. Um, but you don't have an accent of anywhere, right? So, which is hilarious. But it seems to me that's a it might just be a way of which your life now expresses that you're a mix of various places.
It could be. Yeah. I spent quite a bit of time. I grew up in the first house I remember. We lived in Lodi, California. Lodi is made famous by the Creedence Clearwater Revival song "Stuck in Lodi Again."
Mm.
So, yeah, I grew up in Lodi, Central California, and then we ultimately moved to Colorado when I was 12, and then I moved back to California after I, did my time in Houston. Literally, did my time in Houston, and Canada for grad school, back to California for jobs, work, Bay Area, then ultimately San Diego, where
Hmm.
you and I, of course, met and worked together, and then Kansas City for a few years, and then back to Colorado. So yeah, I don't know. I just never really paid attention to whether I had an accent or not, but
Yeah, but you don't. So, in all those travels, Gary, were they? I mean, clearly the 28-year-old having the courage to go get an MBA at UBC was a choice. Um, for the other kind of the way your career unfolded, and if anybody looks up Gary Lundberg on LinkedIn, he has a very impressive resume with these stellar brands that he's worked at. But it's a pretty good list. Did those transitions happen organically, or did you plan them? How did that unfold?
yeah, I think there's two sides to that coin about like the companies I've worked for and the caliber of companies, and but then as you alluded to, the number of companies I've worked for. So some people may look at my experience and go, "Wow, this guy has ADHD. Like every 2 years, he's changing companies, changing jobs." Um, so I have had the good fortune of working with some really good companies and some really good roles. But back to your question about whether some were deliberate, some were, some weren't. And I would say, like, going back to my first job as a petroleum engineer, I picked that degree because I was good at math, good at science. So my career counselors in high school were, encouraging me to go in that direction. My dad worked in the earth sciences industry. He was an executive for a company that made mineral processing equipment. So I was already kind of in that earth world. And by the way, one of the best colleges for those types of engineering disciplines was right in our backyard, the Colorado School of Mines. It's a very
Which is awesome. I imagine like you're a dwarf and they
yeah.
give you a satchel and a pick and they go
Yeah,
into the mines.
yeah, exactly. I think it literally was like the first college west of the Mississippi. It's a very primitive, archaic name now, but they don't change it. They don't want to change it because
Of
it's
course not.
got this
It's
legacy behind it.
tradition, right?
Well, I picked that major because I think I saw on the news, when I was 16, 15 years old or whatever, like the top paying degrees coming out of college at that time were like petroleum, computer. Um, I mean, this is mid '80s, so it was 100 years
Right.
ago. But anyway, I was like, oh, well, petroleum engineering. Maybe I'll file that away and see what happens there. So anyway, long story longer, I got a degree, and then 6 years into the career, I was miserable. I just was like,
Oh
what the heck am I doing?
no.
Yeah, just this is not what I want to do. I mean, I'm polluting the world. I'm like just digging holes in the ground. I mean, I wasn't personally doing it, but I was working
I
for a
get you.
company that did that stuff,
Right.
and it was a little bit of a uh I don't know what the right word is, but just kind of an emotional, not an emotional crisis, but just like a
It could have
career.
been.
Yeah, it wasn't a crisis. I was just like, I don't think this is my jam. I don't think I can really do this for 30, 40 years. And
Right.
so I was like, well, I don't really know what I want to do. So maybe an MBA will spark some interest in some other
Maybe,
areas. And,
so
and
it's interesting. It's kind of like, you left Colorado to go to Houston because you don't want to stay there. So you're like, okay, I need an exit plan. Push. And then when you're in a career, good for you for having the fortitude to realize that that wasn't your forever path and you need an exit plan, right? So it's kind of like it was an exit, right? That took you to the next place, which is
yeah,
natural and it happens. But I think that that's an interesting way that sometimes we make our decisions, right? It's not that I'm choosing this, I'm leaving this.
yeah. I think you're spot on. I was looking to get out of an uncomfortable situation, and but to not only quit my job with just the savings I had and pay my own college and then move to Canada. Like, people thought I was absolutely nuts. It was a decent job. I mean, I worked for what is, I think it was now, it was Arco. They were bought by BP. Anyway, so it was a good job. I was making a, decent wage, but like to just give it up because it was just not where I saw myself. What
That
took a
takes
lot
some
of fortitude.
fortitude. I was going to say that took some guts, right? That took some stones to do that. And
Yeah,
what I'm impressed by is that you decided to make that choice. And what's interesting is that you said you reached this point and you said it wasn't emotional, but I'll push back on that because it had to be emotional, right? The discomfort of where you were and the emotional response to seeing your life 20, 30 years down the road in an area that you didn't want to be in. Of course, it's emotion that made you eject. You had to escape.
that's fair. That's absolutely fair. And I tell you, I mean, probably the biggest emotional component was just leaving where I was. Like the
Yeah.
friends that I was at the time I was living in um, basically Long Beach, California, Huntington Beach, Seal Beach, that area. And so to just quit my job with my satchel of savings that I amassed over, six, incredible years, you know, my satchel of $6, I packed my bags and went to Canada, but like leaving my friends.
Yeah.
But for me, I think at that time I didn't have any responsibilities to anybody except myself. And so I kind of thirsted for that adventure. Like, why Canada? I'm like, why not? Like, who else goes to school in Canada? Like, that would just be
Right.
amazing. And so I did it, and that afforded me the opportunities to go to places like Hong Kong, and also I studied abroad for about 5 months in Sydney, Australia, which was a
Great.
great experience. Um, I don't know where I'm going with this, but uh, yeah, it is a fair call out that it was an emotionally driven. But I didn't. My parents thought I was nuts. They had forked out a pretty decent chunk of change putting me through the school of mines, and for me to
Right.
say like, "Hey, mom, dad, thanks. I had a great 6 year run, but I'm just gonna I'm just gonna chuck that in the bin, and I think I'm gonna think I'm be a work at a gym or something. I don't know. Um, they weren't too keen on that, but of course they knew like, okay,
Yeah.
he's gonna get a degree, he's gonna get an MBA. Like, you
Yeah.
can't really go too wrong with an MBA. And then yeah, so I landed on terra firma back in the Bay Area during the dot-com era. I'm
Hmm.
trying to come full circle to like your question about how many of my job changes were intentional versus not.
Well,
And
but it's interesting. I think you answered the first push, right? Because the first push was a completely different life choice, right? And escaping that track and going on another track, which was uncertain, right? You didn't quite know where it was going to lead. But I also think, too, that's part of the adventure, right? One of the beautiful things about wandering is that you don't know where you're going to go.
for sure, all who wander aren't lost, so I think that that's a fair characterization, at least at that time in my life, how
Hmm.
I was kind of approaching situations. I happened to, while I was in college or in grad school, develop an interest in marketing, and in
Mm-hmm.
particular technology marketing. The internet was booming at the time. This is late 90s. And so I thought, oh, technology marketing, that's something that scratches my itch, because I'm interested in technology. I've got an engineering background. I kind of get it. And I also have a knack for positioning benefits to to of a product to people. And anyway, so that's how I ended up in the Bay Area. Worked for a company called 3Com. They don't exist anymore. They were purchased and got dismantled. But I ended up in San Diego working with all these different. That's at the time, you couldn't throw a rock and not hit a new internet startup that was hiring, and they're
Mm-hmm.
destined for greatness. And so I took a job with an internet startup that happened to have offices in San Diego. And so my wife and I, we were married at that time. We wanted to get out of the Bay Area because the Bay Area housing was crazy, and we wanted to start a family, and we couldn't afford a house. So oddly enough, housing compared in San Diego compared to the Bay Area was affordable.
Right.
So we moved to San Diego, and then guess what? The startup that I joined imploded. So
Oh.
that was, I guess you could chalk that in the category of non-intentional job changes.
It's so interesting too because um we'll take a quick pause in a moment because your wandering choices now change. When earlier you said, hey, you weren't responsible for anybody, but as soon as you have married, as soon as you have a family, the responsibility completely changed. And we'll talk about that next. We'll be right back. So once you're married and you have dreams of having a family, that changes everything. One of the things that I think most men could relate to is a feeling of pressure, responsibilities, roles that, you know, even today, maybe not as much today with Generation Z getting a job, but definitely in our generation or before, the assumption was that the man in a relationship would be the primary breadwinner. It wasn't even a question when I was growing up, right? It wasn't even a consideration that it wouldn't be that. And so the question was, "Hey Foster, what's your major?" And if I was dating somebody, it was like, "She's awesome, she's going to do great, but what's your major? What are you going to do?" Right? Who in this relationship is going to be the breadwinner? And it was always me, right? I was always kind of looking at me when they would ask those questions and thinking about my dad and what, he worked really hard. My dad is such a loving, brilliant man, but he worked really hard. He worked long hours and did well. But there was a responsibility that just became assumed and part of his life. And now that you got married and had a dream and aspiration of children and your startup imploded that you were working for, what kind of new responsibility did you start to feel with your career?
Yeah, this I think is definitely an inflection point where I transition to, I can no longer be as, I'll use the term, flighty in terms of who I work for and what I do. I need to get focused. I need to concentrate on a long-term career path that is going to sustain our family. I would say I grew up probably in a not dissimilar environment that you did. My dad was the breadwinner. My mom was somewhat the stereotypical, you know, stay-at-home mom, which is plenty to do on that front. I'm not
Sure.
minimizing
Oh,
the
never.
efforts expended on that front. And then, but she was also had a bit of a teaching background, so she would also take, part-time teaching jobs once my sister and I were, could kind of get on by ourselves, or we were in school. Um, but my dad was definitely the chief breadwinner. Now, my wife, on the other hand, grew up in a household where both her parents were teachers, both kind of brought in the bread.
Similar kind of
Uh,
incomes, I would imagine, being both
right,
teachers.
right. So she had no, you know, inclination that like, oh, my role is in the home or anything like that. It was like, no, I'm going to teach. As soon as we've got this kid situation sorted, I'm going to go back to teaching, and
Sure.
you go off and do what you're going to do. And so we'll meet at home and have dinner. And that's kind of where we landed. But I would say that definitely, um, there was a moment when shortly after our first child was born, our son, uh, that I actually was fortunate enough to work for a company that offered paternity leave. So I got, I think, a couple of weeks of paternity leave. So after he was born, was giving my wife a break and pushing the stroller around the neighborhood with our, infant son. And it, I'd say, like, in that, like, you've got a wife and a child now and a mortgage. And so, not that I was any less committed to my career and job at that point, but that was, I think, um, it really became very serious to me. Like, this is, I don't know how to describe the feeling, but it hit me as a good thing. It was a very profound and exciting feeling to have. Like, oh my gosh, look at me! I got a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
wife, great house, good job, amazing child now, and like it's all kind of coming together. And so, but
Mm-hmm. And it coming together also creates it's a beauty. That's why it's a beautiful burden, right? It's fantastic, but suddenly there's a burden and a responsibility that happens where you can't fuck it up.
yeah, yeah, and that's probably a good way of putting it. I think that's probably what came to my head. Like, okay, man, enjoy this moment. You get a couple of weeks off and relish your time with your family, but don't fuck this up. Like, you really got to, mind your p's and q's now, and make sure that nothing goes sideways. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I did change jobs from that company, and this is when I started at. Can I name a company? Well,
Sure. I mean, it's on
it's on my
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. It's on my LinkedIn. So I work for Intuit, and so the makers of TurboTax, and so I was involved in with that company, and began to get. I was there probably one of the longest times. I was there almost 3 years, and it was with them that I started to get a bit disillusioned in terms of how I was being typecast in that particular organization, and how I felt like my creative energy was being stifled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how
Mm-hmm.
you and I crossed paths,
Right.
and how
You know,
I kind
it
of,
and it's a funny thing because here you are just 3 years earlier saying, man, I'm going to get serious. I'm going to dig in. But human nature is such that you're like, ah, I, this isn't exactly it, but I still have to be serious about it, right? I still have to dig through. And I think that there's this incredible tension that I believe is natural where, you have these moments of I'm super fortunate to be where I am, but I'm not exactly where I want to be.
I think that's precisely where I was, and perhaps I'm, um, I joked a little bit earlier about ADHD, and that diagnosis didn't exist when I was a kid, but I am fairly confident that had I been born, 20 years later, I probably would have been diagnosed with ADHD. So I think there is, I do
Interesting.
get a little burned out on roles after 2.5, 3 years, even at Amazon. I am on my, I just had my 5-year anniversary at Amazon, and I,
Congratulations.
thank you. And this is, I'm on my like fourth job at Amazon.
So you're
So,
still changing jobs. It just happens to
right,
be with the same company.
exactly. So one of the nice things about working for, such a massive company is that once you're kind of in the door, you can move around and experience different things, which has been kind of ideal for me because the name on my resume doesn't change. I'm not shifting, you know, insurance and all that stuff that comes with like actually changing employers. But I can change roles, and so that helps me grow, helps keep me engaged. I get to experience new and different things every 1.5, 2 years. Some of those changes, it's funny to hear myself say this, but some of those changes were also not intentional
Uh-huh.
because some teams, some executive layers up decides like, well, we should combine these teams, and so that's what happens. So you come to
I
work one day and you're
heard
like,
it's a pretty large company.
yeah, yeah, you were on team X, now you're on team Y, and oh, okay, I guess I'll sit over here now.
Over here. But it might be perfect for you, right? Because, it's interesting you think about ADHD and, you know, the wanderlust that is still within Gary, right? I think that's pretty interesting where it's still an expression of your wanderlust to try new things and new adventures. So there's this popular and well trod kind of storylines of having different lives and different dimensions, right? The multiverse has been uh, a pop culture trope now for the last 5+ years, but a really wonderful book by a guy named Matt Haig is called The Midnight Library, and it's about a woman who at a certain moment in her life starts to experience all of the lives that she might have led based on the choices that she made. And I'm wondering for you, experiencing these different lives and these different situations, this might be just part and parcel of you. It might be like you have a what if um, yen to experience new experiences and new people and teams and new dynamics.
I I can't argue with that. I think that yen still exists, to want to experience new and different things. Um, if I had to choose a different career, or if things had gone differently, I don't. I mean, I chose a path of engineering and science because that's what I was good at initially. It wasn't necessarily my passion. It wasn't
Hmm.
really what I wanted to do. If I could have had my pick of career choices out of college. In fact, I once gave a presentation to my parents about how they should send me off to this school for guitarists in
Ah,
Hollywood.
yes,
and
sir. That's
and
a
I
brilliant presentation.
yes, I presented to them, like, but I went because my parents were willing to, foot the bill for my college, which thank you, mom and dad,
Right,
for doing that. I
right.
ended up with a great education. I was very marketable. I got a job right out of college. I got two jobs. And then ultimately ended up in the Bay Area, but then, or not, I mean, in Long Beach, but then ultimately decided, you know what, I kind of sold out, kind of, because I went down a path of where I was pressured and thought I should go, but I didn't really follow my true calling, which is at the time in high school I was in a band, and we were going to be huge, and I loved playing guitar, and I wanted to be in a band, and I wanted to pursue that, but that wasn't that wasn't I was advised by my parents, like, that's if
Right.
if you want to do that, you know good luck to you, but if you want to go our way, we'll help you out financially and
Sure.
pay your way. So
That's as
anyway,
old as the hills, Gary. That story, right? Of being the artist and wanting to pursue an artistic
yeah, it's
passion, and
not
then
original.
no, it's fine. I'm not saying that it needs to be. And the quote unquote selling out. I think that there is a reconciliation where you start figuring out, what's real and what's not. And when you're in your late teens and early 20s, following your passion, I think is such a natural fire that's in you, right? I mean, I when I went to college, I was a bit uncertain, and then I went into a fine arts program because I was going to illustrate children's books, and that was fine, and that was great. And then I realized when I was out actually doing that kind of work that the uncertainty and the stress of the unpredictable nature was not worth the joy of doing the work, and so I needed to find another path, right? And we have the luxury of being pretty well educated young men, and having variety of choices, right? And sometimes, though, the variety of choices becomes a paradox of choice, right? How, which direction do I go into? And like I said, there's this really interesting when both of these things can exist, where you feel supremely fortunate, yet at the same time uncertain about the choice that you made and why you made that choice.
Yeah, I think uncertainty is a word you've used that I keyed on, and that's a big driver of why I didn't choose path B, went with path A, because that was a fairly certain path that I'm fairly confident I'm going to do well in my math and science courses, and I'm going to get a
Mm-hmm.
degree, and I'm going to get a good job, and I'm going to be on that trajectory that's fairly protracted versus, wow, what are you going to do? You going to wait tables in Hollywood while you try to form a band and go to this silly school and get paired up with other musicians and see what happens there? Like, yeah, it seems pretty risky, but so but it's those dreamers that pull through and see
Sure,
through
some
those
of them
types of.
do. Some of them
Yeah.
do, right? And those there's the of course the book called The Alchemist, which kind of talks about that person who kind of drives through those years of uncertainty and years of doubt and comes out the other end being able to truly follow their passion. I guess now I would ask you, now that you've got the experience of, and now that I think the self awareness of a wanderlust tendency, and now blessed with a career situation where you can still have that experimentation and wanderlust within the safety net of a whole business, right? What do you see next as new experiences that you want to try? Have you been thinking about that? Or are you just open to things coming through?
Yeah, I am open to new experiences. Um, I think one thing that when people have asked me like about my jobs and my careers, I'm quick to say that the journey has been the destination. Like, I haven't had a quest of like, I'm going to get this job with this company in this place. It's just, but having those experiences evolve organically and flowing, going with the flow, I think has been what I've appreciated and has helped me grow. Not necessarily been the best career. I don't really recommend my career path to anybody. Yeah, I've bounced around. I mean, I know you. You've only, I think you've worked for two companies in your whole career. I look at other people at Amazon that have been at Amazon for 20 years, 10 years. I've been there now 5, which is like almost a world record for me in terms of like longevity with a
Sure.
company. So, um, but I am envious of those individuals like you that find stability. It's like, why rock the boat? Why, if you find a good thing and you're good at it and rewarded and recognized and valued and you find purpose in it, then don't look over the fence. There's no reason to. It's stay where you are. I mean, that's, and I think have been the victim of myself in terms of always, you know, often earlier thinking about, hey, well, what's over there? Oh, I wonder what that company is like. I've heard good things about them, and I'm getting a little, I've been with this company now. Look at the clock. I've been here 20 minutes. Yeah, maybe I could do something over there. So,
Hmm.
um, some of my career choices, yeah, were evolutionary. Some were not. I've been laid off a couple of times. Um,
Which
so
happens when you do that. So I got a question for you then. How do you explain and or advise or tell the stories of this interesting path you've taken to your children, right? Because they're on a track now, into a collegiate world. There's a very clear expectation out of a collegiate world that the next steps are going to be ones that make up for the quote unquote debt or the spend or the time or the investment, right? It's so interesting, Gary. I was thinking about, because right now it's springtime, right? We're recording this at the end of May, so it's a lot of graduation for high schools and stuff. And I saw this one story where they were celebrating the kids going to college, but they were equally celebrating the kids going to trade schools. I was like, awesome. I love that. I love equal celebration. I think, if you're going to be a plumber, electrician, contractor, any kind of, trade, apprenticeship, steelworking, manufacturing, whatever, that's fantastic. And I think about these two kids, right? Right. One kid, Martin, we'll call him, goes to a liberal arts school, gets a degree in anthropology, follows his passion, stuff like that. Another kid, we'll call him Phil. Phil, maybe he's an apprentice. And suddenly 3 or 4 years later, they're 21, 22 years old. Phil, who's the apprentice and the plumber, maybe making 65, 80K in a plumbing career, building it up. Martin graduates with an anthropology degree, can't quite get a job, maybe working at a coffee shop, has a lot of student debt, right? It's a very different thing, right? When you have this collegiate degree, there's an instant expectation that you have to pay that out.
right,
When you talk to your kids now, they're right on the cusp, right? They're going through their college and they're planning those next couple of years heading out. What do
right.
you tell them about the flexibilities, the burdens, the expectations of their career?
Yeah, great question. I think first, I we've always been encouraging of our children to go whichever way they want in terms of the disciplines that they pursued. We haven't really tried to affect them in their pursuits, other than to know that they have our full support. So our son is pursuing computer science, our daughter is pursuing biology, pre-med, so which is great. We couldn't be prouder.
Sure.
But I've also impressed upon them, like, this is something that I think is amazing, that I applaud kids that are 18 going into college, 17, 18, and if they know what they want to do and they pursue that and they come out the other end with that vision, and that's their career and they know it. Me, on the other hand, I came out, at 22, or entered college. You kind of have to declare a major. You're a couple years into your
Mm-hmm.
schooling now, and I'm like, you're 18 years old or 19 or 20, and you're determining this is what I'm going to do ostensibly the rest of your life, if this is your career path, your chosen major. And I think it's incredible. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 20-year-old or 19-year-old choosing that this is my career path. But I don't want to diminish those 18-year-olds, high school graduates that have that vision. They want to be an apprentice for a plumber, or they want to get I forget your other degree example, but um, that what I want to illustrate, or what I have tried to impress upon our children, is like, if you don't if you don't find happiness down that path, you can change the path. Look at me. Look at how many different paths I've
Look at
had.
me.
And
Right.
and
Look at
uh,
me.
well, I mean, look at me,
But I think,
but
but I
also
think, but
look
no.
away.
Look at me, but look at me, but don't do what I did. No,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
what I like, what I think though, that I think that what you've shown your children just through your example is that um, it is okay to risk and you can try different things and it can be okay, right? That if you have,
Yes.
enough faith in yourself and the like, that it's okay to experiment, right? I was telling our kids that there's no one way to live a life. There's just there's no one way, and the challenge is to find your way. Um, no, that's a hard thing. So I've got a couple questions
Sure.
before we split.
Absolutely.
In the course of all of your career experiences and life experiences and the like, who did you see out there that you were like, oh, that's a model for me? That's a model of manhood. That's someone who I was like, that's kind of who I want to be and what I want to do. Was there anyone like that in your life growing up, or when you were in your young adulthood?
Well, I really emulated my father. I don't think that's going to be a real shock to your listeners that I think the world of my father. He
Mm.
was such an intellectual, a great conversationalist, funny guy. I mean, he's still around. He lives like an hour south of us, but he he inspired my interest in engineering, and kind of got to walk the shop with him a few times and learned a little bit about the business that he was managing. So I just had he was and remains kind of my north star of the type of person that I want to be.
That
Uh,
is beautiful. That's beautiful. That your father's your North Star. I love that.
yeah, I will tell you this. We I have to kind of zip it, Skippy, when the conversation turns towards politics. So that said, I still don't want to ruffle his feathers, but
That's
yeah,
wonderful.
he was definitely an inspiration to me. But yeah,
That's wonderful. I think that to have that in your life is something super special. That's great. That's
but
great.
there's definitely been some others that I've worked with that I've really emulated and admired their leadership style. And I'm not gonna I'm not gonna leave you out of this equation, Christopher. I loved working with you. I thought
Oh
your
yeah.
leadership style was very inspirational. I thrived at Modern Postcard, and that was a great experience. But there was one leader for a company that I worked with a few years back, and they their I don't know how do I characterize this? Kind of like their hallmark or their sort of uh, not a catchphrase, but just something that was uh, definitely unique to their approach to situations was you would ask them a question, and then I'm wired that if somebody asks me a question, I want to deliver instant gratification. I want to tell them, "Oh yes, I have that information. It's right here. Let me get it for you." Um, you'd ask them a question, and there would be this pregnant pause, just this silence, and you thought, like, did I ask an offensive question? Like, what's happening? But they were processing your question. They weren't just reacting to you know inputs and outputs. It was like, I want to contextualize my voluminous information to ensure that I'm delivering it in the context that's appropriate for you to optimize its value. And the
Hmm.
fact that they were just so thoughtful, and when there would be a meeting going on with this person, and then they were a leader and a question came to them, or he would say, I have a question, then everybody would focus on them, and there would be like 20 seconds of silence, like, and your question is like, but it was just like he didn't want to interrupt people, so he kind of gave um the shot across the bow, like, I have a question. And rather than waiting for a little fracture in the conversation to insert to jam their question in. um but I just thought it was fascinating that he would just listen and contextual, and then inevitably when he did speak, it was clear, coherent, concise, very, you know what you wanted to hear, the direction. But it took time, and it was really interesting to actually see it, like, a lot of leaders are really good at thinking on their feet. And yes, when you ask them a question, they don't wait 20 seconds to answer you. But here in real time, it was clear that the care and deliberation that this person took to ensure that whatever question they had or whatever insight they had to impart was contextualized to optimize and add value to the conversation or decision being considered.
Yeah, it sounds to me that what he did was a beautiful super communicator type of approach to make you feel important because your question was important. It was worthy of consideration, and it was worthy of him taking the time to figure out not only how you were asking the question, why you were asking the question, and your state of mind and presence in the situation when the question was being asked.
I think
That
that's
to me
exactly right.
that to me indicates someone who has a lot of devotion and care and love and creates that value. Say, you are so important, I'm really going to pay attention. What
Yeah,
a good
I
leader.
I think that's accurate. Now that said, that was a very unique individual. I can't say that I've really worked with anybody else like that since that time or before that time either. So it was a very
That's
unique
fantastic.
experience. But I really valued it and admired it. And like you said, when you got a response from them, you felt like, wow, he gets me and totally empowered me to take that kernel of insight and do something with it now. I feel like I'm more knowledgeable at my job than I was before I talked
Well,
to them.
I'm really glad you shared that. That's something to learn from. So, a final question that I'll ask you is, who is somebody that I don't know that you know that I should meet?
Sorry, who's somebody that I know that or sorry, you have to repeat the question.
I'll ask, no problem. So, I'll have a final question for you. Who is
Yeah.
somebody that you know that
Okay.
I don't know, but that I should meet?
Wow. That is a really interesting question. Um, Um, I would say that there's a manager that I've had at Amazon a couple jobs ago, and he's actually based in San Diego. Um, and he was another one of these leaders that was very, I think, um, still waters run deep kind of people that
Hmm.
I don't think it's any secret that Amazon is full of type A leaders and a lot of hysterics and histrionics, and it's very, hair on fire a lot of times. But with this particular leader as well, they were al- always diffusive of anxiety. Like they had a very
Mm,
calming presence. Um, and and not to boost your ego, but I think you had that effect on me as well as a
hmm,
leader. That you had a very calming presence. We had a lot of stuff on our plate. We had a lot of balls in the air,
yeah.
but just being able to kind of crystallize things and sort things out um, was just, I think, a really all too rare
Mm,
leadership trait. But this person he's just a warm individual too. I think you'd really like him. He's a really
perfect.
fun, friendly guy, and he's got a lot of great business perspective. Um, Now that said, I don't know if I don't know if you're fishing for other guests on the show,
No,
but
no, just someone to meet, right? Just I think that what we find is that what I love about as you go through world and meet people. I mean, you and I worked together for a couple of years, but one of the things that's beautiful about work environments is that you can create these friendships that transcend the work environment, where you can do collaborative work where you understand each other's intelligence. Hopefully make some good work friends, but then you start connecting people to other people that you don't know who kind of build a cohort through life. So anyway, no, it would be great to meet that person. I'd love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
I've got another person to meet. He was our old neighbor in Carlsbad, and he and his wife still live in the house that was next to ours when
Hmm.
we moved on. Um, and he would be great. He's the bundle of energy, really outgoing, strongly opinionated, but just hysterical as well. He would be, I think, somebody that would be, a good person to speak with.
Good fit. Well,
In
thank you.
general. Yeah.
I would love to meet them. Love to meet them both. So, Gary, as you start, looking at the next 5, 10 years or so, sure, you've got to finish up your career. Your kids will be launching, and you'll be a part of that launch. But what else is next for you? What is something that you're excited about?
Yeah. It's interesting. As I've been working for Amazon for now a few years, I would say one of the things that I've you probably couldn't tell in the course of this conversation, but my presentation skills have dramatically improved. Um, so I've been mustering the courage up, probably from the encouragement of my friends, to try to do open mic stand up. And so
Yes.
they're so they're, doesn't come across in this conversation, but I'm really funny. And so and I've been told that enough, like, "Oh my god, you're just one of these, like, naturally funny guys. You should totally try stand up." I'm like, What am I gonna do if I don't have any jokes? I don't have any material." They're like, "Yeah, but you're just so quick and, you say funny things." I'm like, "Okay, well, I don't know how to translate into what you I appreciate what you're saying. That's very nice, but I don't know how I could get up and do open mic stand up." So I've actually been putting together like some bits, and then
Yes.
what I've found what and I've done some homework studying some of the comics that I really like, and what I found, the comics that I appreciate and enjoy the most are those that can really stitch together all these little bits, a joke every 8 seconds or whatever. But they're not just off the wall here and there. And just it's not like a Stephen Wright where he's telling one liners, but it's like having that flow is a real craft. And as I've studied some of these, all the household name comedians that you're aware of,
Hmm.
um, I find that they're really good at stitching that narrative together and in a funny way, stitching all these little bits together so that they're congruent. And then you can have like these callbacks where it's like you reference something up front, and then you might tie into it in the middle, and then that's your walk off. Like you round it off with like this big finale that ties certain little components together. And so my bathroom mirror thinks I'm hysterical. So um, I've been working on stitching these little bits together,
Awesome.
and so now it's just, I don't know what it is. Like I can present in a room of executives, and I might be a little tense, but it's not unfamiliar territory for me. But to stand in front of a room full of people I don't know and tell original material that I think is funny, I'm just gonna feel naked, and just like it's terrifying to me that I would think of ever doing that. But I I'm right on the cusp of it. And then I think I referenced earlier that I'm gonna be this MC for my 40th high
Right.
school reunion. So that's
That's
gonna
a
be
good
one
place
of
to
my
start.
well, I actually don't want to start there. I want to get some experiences behind me to kind of work out some kinks. But I also have some, you know, material that I've ginned up specific to that high school 40th
I
reunion
love
event.
it.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, I don't know if it's going to pay well, but or at all, but it's something. It's a bucket list thing. It's something I definitely want to do. It's something that I've been at parties or other social environments,
Mhm.
and when I say something that people find funny and they laugh, like it's like energy to me. It's like,
Sure. Huh.
that I want that. Like, I think that
Yeah,
might be something that I could potentially do. So
I love
that's
it.
I don't know if that's
That's
gonna
a
be my next career, but it's something I do wanna try.
I love it, and I think you're gonna be hilarious, and I can't wait to hear it. And Gary, I
Yeah.
loved having you here, and I love you, my friend. I'm so glad that you made the time for us.
I love you too, and I'm really grateful and honored that, you've asked me to be part of the program, and, it's been my pleasure.
Awesome. Have a great night.
Alright. Thanks, Chris.
Yes, sir, Gary Lundberg, the TL. Absolutely. Great conversation. Great journey. Different from other people's, right? You know, his adulthood unfolded in a way that was driven by the career and job choices that he made. And then when family came along, they came along with him too. I mean, they all moved to Kansas. They all moved from San Diego. They all moved to Colorado. Right? And that's part of it too, right? Because once you commit and once you have everyone with you, it's not just yourself that's on this career path. Everybody else comes along too. So what did we learn from Gary? I think we learned that even if on the surface someone looks at your life and says, man, you've got everything, you've got it made, it doesn't mean that you might not think about the what if. It doesn't mean that you say, gosh, maybe I could do something else. And this is great, but maybe there's another way or another position that might be better for me. You know what? That's okay. If you have options, it's okay to think about what if I explore those options. Well, listen, that's why we have this podcast. That's why we're talking with menfolk, to learn from what they experienced and to think about our own experiences, what our path is, what's important to us, what are we going to sit with in our current life, and what do we risk by changing it up a bit. Risk is different when you get older. It's very different when you have family. And it depends on your tolerance for risk and your confidence of making those changes. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you share this with other men. Visit menfolkjourneys.com, and on the website you can book a conversation, because I'd love to have a conversation with you. Because here's what I know. You have a great story to tell, and we'd love to share your story. Word bid Philared.